This is my audience. The number of immigrants living within the United States is growing. Many are settling in suburbs, small towns, and rural areas, bringing new cultures and languages to new places. As a result, many law enforcement agencies are dealing with unfamiliar languages as they work to ensure public safety. Today, I will be addressing the important components for law enforcement to consider when overcoming language barriers. The main ideas will include knowing your population, establishing language policies, and educating and evaluating staff. Law enforcement should get to know the neighborhood they serve and the people who live in it. This can help the officer prepare for possible future interactions with people that live with language barriers. It's very important to understand the changing demographics and what to consider when making informed decisions. Like if there is a call coming from a predominantly Spanish-speaking area, you might want to consider sending an officer who can speak Spanish. If you have one available, which is not always possible, and in those cases you'll have to rely on your other resources, such as handouts and aids, which we'll cover in a little bit. Your agency should compare and analyze data by keeping a log. Whenever officers inform back about any kind of encounter involving a house that maybe is all Spanish speaking, or let's say it's not very uncommon these days that the kids speak English, because they go to school, but their parents or their grandparents might not. So it's just something to kind of keep a log on, and that way you have for future reference if you have to go back to that house or that area. Law enforcement agencies have a lot of policies and procedures for pretty much everything that they do. And now some agencies are starting to develop policies for interacting with people that have the language barrier. A policy can identify elements that can improve an interaction as well as show the department's commitment to the community, which I think is kind of plays a big role for agencies that do community policing, which is using the community involvement in your policing, such as neighborhood watches and stuff like that. The Department of Justice identified 4 factors. One would be demographics, which is like age, race, and sex. Then 2, frequency of contact. How often do you have contact with a certain area or a certain house? What kind of contact is it? Sometimes more majorly friendly, or do you have hostile encounters, at a certain house or an area? And then 4 would be your agency resources, which would be your interpreters and your handouts and aids, and now a lot of agencies are using like apps that you can speak into it, and it will translate what into whatever language you select. So that kind of is handy too. Law enforcement officers should be trained on how to respond when interacting with people that have language barriers, and they need to know when to get an interpreter, because you don't always need to have an interpreter, and like I said before, sometimes you just can't get one. So you have to use your other resources, which would be, they usually have like a quick guide, like pocket books that you could use for referencing words and that kind of stuff. And otherwise they should have handouts of their Miranda rights that are pre-printed out in a certain language, whereas if you have to arrest somebody and you have to read them their Miranda rights and they don't speak English, a lot of officers, they have it all written down on a card that they keep in their pocket, so that way they can read it word for word, because if they don't read it word for word, there could be stipulation on violating their Fifth Amendment rights if they said it wrong or whatever. So that way you can just give them the handout, they can read it and understand it in their own language. Finally, staff should be evaluated on knowledge to ensure competency. You would not want to train officers and send them into the field without trusting that their ability to allocate these resources. The same goes for those in the department that claim to speak another language. You would first want to evaluate their language fluency. Maybe they need a little help in becoming fluent. So then you would, if that's the case, you would want to try to get them in some programs to help them become fluent. The U.S. Department of Justice actually requires that law enforcement agencies receiving any federal assistance develop strategies for communicating with people who have language barriers. I think if each department gets to know their community and the demographics within it, and they start establishing these policies, which include training and evaluating their staff, I think officers can greatly improve communication within their communities.